It's on this side of the border. Well, no, it isn't. There's a whole different Rivière des Mille-Îles, just north of Laval. Do you situate it for us? So we people who aren't in Quebec actually know where it is.
Yeah. So Montreal's an island. North of Montreal, there's another little island. It's not the same water. The St. Lawrence flows more or less around Montreal. The Ottawa River comes in roughly in that same area, but actually flows around the Laval Island. So it's the Ottawa River that leads into either Rivière des Mille-Îles or Rivière des Prairies on both sides of Laval. And then eventually all of that goes down the St. Lawrence, right? It either goes to James Bay or it goes down the St. Lawrence. So that's the Rivière des Mille-Îles. Now, contrary to the St. Lawrence or Rivière des Prairies, Rivière des Mille-Îles is a little shallower, is a lot slower. It doesn't flow just as fast as the other rivers.
Which explains the ecosystem. And did pick up on the fact there's a herbier flottant, there's a marais and a marécage, all these different water bodies. Can you tell us more about how this happened and how it is being protected today?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my interest in the river, came from the fact that it's a river like many other cities have close to home, right? It's the backyard river, and often these are the rivers that we don't necessarily go to. The Rivière des Mille-Îles is in fact peculiar about this because it's so much slower and it's got all this muddy color. But actually, that's kind of the interest of the whole thing. So there are marshes and there are wetlands and so on, right? So it doesn't have that pristine blue color that you'll find in mountain rivers, but the whole interest is there. There is a whole ecosystem that wants this stuff and that thrives in this river. And that's sort of what attracted to me. It's sort of the underdog river. Let's put it that way, right? If people who love whitewater canoeing and rafting and so on might snub these rivers, but actually they have their utility, they have their importance, and it's important not just to, cover them up and make landfill, but it's important to make sure that this part of the ecosystem is protected.
And your film is really focused on a number of people who could be, categorized as hippie dippies and all that stuff from back in the 60s. And the work they did to protect the river it's come to fruition all these years later. Do you want to speak to who these people are? There seems to be 3 or 4 different people I noticed in the movement.
One sort of like tagline that I could use for the river is 3 suburban stories on a river in need for love, right? I didn't want necessarily people who cared for the river. I sort of wanted a variety of cross sections. I found it interesting to have a young kid who just happens to be a YouTuber, doesn't necessarily know much about the environment, ironically, right? He's just this young kid with a pickup truck who likes to go fishing. Then we have a couple of family who doesn't really think of the environment all that much, but they so happen to live near the river. And then the third sort of character, well, he's somebody who's really gotten involved. I want the river to be discovered through just ordinary eyes. It does turn out that one of the people is an activist, and he can tell us a lot more about it. But that's the whole aspect. It's the whole portrait. In a way, I'm not necessarily an activist. Maybe I am through this movie, but a lot of the people around me aren't necessarily. But through their eyes, we discover a river that we may have snubbed. I find it important to also show through the eyes of ordinary people that the local river is just as fascinating.
Like you mentioned how heavily polluted it was back in between 65 and 85. It was interesting how they explained there was this movement of population. Everybody had their house and bungalow. All of a sudden, they all disappear and went to the Laurentians. Has there been a movement back from the Laurentians to this area, or is it just being urbanized by other people, or is there a mixture?
I don't think it's ever going to come back as it was in the 60s or 70s. Maybe it shouldn't, because prior to that time, people weren't necessarily connected to sewer system. It's a parody, but it's, we say, what do you do with the old washer and dryer? Well, throw it in the river was a sort of way of thinking many years ago. We don't want to go back to that time. It was a cottage area, much like, for instance, in the beaches was the cottage area of Toronto. We're not going to come back to the point where the beaches in Toronto is ever going to be a cottage area. It's urbanized. But what is different is people are giving more room for nature to come back. People are, I find, are protecting it a lot more. People are a lot more conscious than they used to be. And I just went on the river with my girlfriend yesterday. We went canoeing, and it's amazing how many paddlers there are, either in stand-up paddle boards or kayaks or canoes. I'd say 10 years ago, this wasn't as true. And certainly 20 years ago, you barely had any canoers out there, and people just had motorboats. The population is not the same along the river. It is more dense, but I feel that there's more care given to it, and people are acting different.
Do you have any more projects in the short or long term for movies about this river or any other subject?
I think my next story is going to be on the St. Lawrence River, which is a whole other world. And there's all these geographical terms that you read, l'Anse Saint-Jean, le Cap Saint-Jacques, and all these things that they all have these geological or geographical connotations. They don't mean much until when you're really on the river, and all of a sudden these things really make their whole sense. And the St. Lawrence is, could be abused. It probably is. I find the whole story of the St. Lawrence interesting, so I might actually want to step up my game and tackle a bit of a bigger monster there.
Where did you find the spots to shoot your film?
Behind me, there's maps of the river, right? They're far, but they're little dots there, and a red dot for fall, a blue dot for winter, a yellow dot for summer. I knew the river a bit. It was more or less my home turf. I grew up, I would ride my bicycle down the road and go fishing there as a kid. And my girlfriend and I went to various spots along the river. I looked at the map and I thought maybe, and I Google mapped the whole thing. And I really did spend a lot of time looking at where we could drop the canoe and go fishing. And the people that I met brought me to their secret locations too. So it's a mixture of that, but it was a passion project. If I'm going to dream of a project of what do I want to get onto as a documentary person, I'm really going to think, what am I going to enjoy the most? Where do I want to spend too much time with a camera at hand? I did do a sort of a historical documentary. It's fine. The story was fascinating, but I got to admit, I prefer spending time on a river with a camera.
Are you going to be working with them again? And tell us a little bit about their background that you personally found fascinating.
I do, of course, keep in touch with them. The YouTuber, he's a YouTuber. He's got a lot of contacts, but we do keep in touch. He's a young kid. He's a couple of years younger than my son, but I relate a lot to his way of talking. The first quick answer is I don't think I'm going to do any other film that's going to follow up with them, although who knows. I really am a curious person. I love getting into people's lives, people who have something to say. It's part of me. I love them all, They become my friends. I tried to get him riled up and pissed off, and he it took him a while because he's really a patient guy. I wanted him to be mad at something. I figured you got to be mad at everything that you've gone through, and he eventually did tell me when he got mad. He and I do, and his wife, we really do keep in touch. And we've been canoeing together a few times since. And these are people that I didn't know at all before I started this movie. And then the little family, we do keep in touch also. Yeah, these people become good connections, acquaintances, friends. Yes, obviously. Am I going to continue filming with them? I doubt it. I'm into the research for our next film, and I suspect I'm going to find somebody with a fascinating story and people that I'm going to connect with again. I think that's the nature of what I'd like to do.
And can you tell us a little bit about your cinematographer, Betty Bogart?
Yes, Betty. She and I work regularly together. We do corporate gigs too, and we do passion projects together also. She came knocking on my door maybe 6 years ago. She was fresh out of school, out of Matane, which is a photography school in Quebec, Lower St. Lawrence. She's originally from France. And I didn't really have work for her, except for this documentary that I was working on, not this one, but a previous one, and it came down to a standstill. And I asked her to help me produce it, I guess, to do all the things that I didn't have the courage to do anymore. And I realized that with a friend, with a colleague, sometimes you'll go further when your knees give out. When my knees give out, hopefully the people around me will still be standing up and will be able to pick me up. And Betty is that kind of a person. So she's more than just the camera person on this. She also paddled during fall when I followed the couple on their canoe. I was paddling like crazy and Betty was filming, but we're good friends and we work on other projects together, and hopefully I can bring her on to my next project.
How important the relationship is with an editor.
Marianne has taste. Put the right images there and mix it nicely and find just a nice smooth connections, and we'll play with the music and I'll give her music mood, but she'll fit it into the right place. And she just has that sort of talent that I don't have. And it's like creating a band, you know, it's like, hey guys, yeah, I think I've got this project and here's how it should go. Do you want to get on? Do you want to be in my band? You know, should we make music together? And so I consider Marianne like that. She's, I don't know, is she the bassist, the drummer? Doesn't matter, you know, but to me, that whole concept is putting a band together and creating a project with it and see where it goes.
What have you learned about yourself through the making of La Rivière?
I didn't know that I wanted to have or to go towards sort of an environmental protection story, but I'm realizing that it's having an impact. People are talking about it. It's getting the word out there. So I do feel like I'm getting this story out there. That maybe it's going to shift minds a bit, you know, and I find that extremely pleasing, but I didn't know I'd be that person to do it, you know. But the other thing is I'm realizing this is the second documentary I'm doing on my own. I'm realizing that I could actually sort of like turn my questions and my camera to almost any story, and I would just love doing it. So it's a bit daunting in a way because it's sort of, it always comes back to the question is, what is going to be my next story? In a weird way, I am now reassured through La Rivière that I could point my camera and my microphone somewhere, and I probably could make a half decent story out of it. So I'm sort of reassured, but I just have more questions now. But it's probably going to be something environmental. And that I've learned through La Rivière because I really enjoy the process and I care deeply about what I'm shooting about.